Reality. When examining the fundamental nature of things, it is interesting to look at the difference between the one and the many. On first impression, it may seem that there are many different things that make up the world. We might say that there are a variety of different things that have different characteristics. The spoon is hard, whereas the air is soft. The pen is light, whereas the book is heavy. So it is possible to distinguish between the attributes of different things that make them distinct from one another. I believe that we come to understand what a thing in itself is through contrast. It is only through a contrast with otherness that anything can be experienced. This spoon only becomes a spoon in relation to what we might call not spoon. I recognise it visually, for instance, because it contrasts with the background. I recognise its texture because it is hard, as opposed to the softness of the air, for instance. So in this way it is contrast that creates separate things. Another way of looking at separate things is to view them as snapshots of a part of the total reality. Imagine if you were to hold up an empty picture frame and walk around the park. You might momentarily capture a tree, or grass, or a pond, or a bird within the frame. This might give you the impression of separate objects, but it is interesting to ask, do these things exist independent of the totality, which we call park? Arguably, the park is a single entity, and if we expand this reasoning outward, the universe as a whole is a single entity. An alternative way to look at reality is in terms of a single underlying substance. Many philosophers have argued that there is a single element to which all things can be reduced, whether it be fire, water, or energy. In this view, a single substance changes its form to make objects that embody different characteristics, so that when we're talking about matter or energy or spoons or air, we're really talking about the same thing. The physicist might argue that apparently separate things are merely different vibrations of the same particles, or that they are all expressions of the same energy. When examining the nature of reality, we can look at substances, and we can also look at consciousness. Is consciousness itself also part of a single substance that underlies our reality, or is consciousness unique in being distinct from the rest of reality? If I were to say, I am conscious of reality, is that making distinctions between myself and consciousness and reality that don't really exist? Perhaps consciousness could be regarded as the fundamental constituent of reality, even prior to energy, or perhaps energy itself is a form of consciousness. Perhaps all things are consciousness manifesting itself in different forms. Needless to say, there is a great debate regarding how anything has come to be in existence at all. If you were a scientist, you might address this problem in terms of a succession of events that began and developed the universe, and that have led to the state of affairs that we experience as the present moment. But the problem with causal chains is that they are purely conceptual, and they separate out what is essentially a continuous process into separate events. In reality, because events flow into one another, there are no separate events. It is only when we begin to understand reality as a single eternal moment that things begin to make sense. You might ask yourself, where is the past now? Where is the future now? They exist in thought form only, and thoughts come and go. One might argue that what comes and goes is not real. So what is real? What really exists? Only what is stable and unchanging and endures forever can be classed as real, as everything else can potentially disappear. I would argue that there are two things that exist forever, and that those two things are intimately interlinked. God, on the one hand, is the creator and sustainer of all things. God is alive now, has always existed, and always will. God is invisible, but has the characteristics of omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence, and is the being that animates life and creates change in the cosmos. On the other hand, there is I, which is my experience of awareness or consciousness. It is the experience of life that is ever present, and it exists regardless of thought and whether I am experiencing the body or not. I can only presume this has always existed, as to imagine anything without the feeling of my aliveness is impossible. The whole of existence can be seen as a play, in which God expresses himself through an infinite number of things that each experience their own sense of separateness. I would hazard a guess that it is only in death that the underlying unity becomes clear, and when these puzzling questions will finally be answered in such a way as to eradicate all doubt.